Moradin Bronzebeard, brother to King Magni and ambassador to the human realm of Lordaeron, hurried along the corridors of the royal place. All these twists and turns and nooks and crannies, the dwarf muttered to himself. If he remembered correctly, the spiral staircase that would take him up to the king's private apartments and balconies was around here somewhere. He seemed to recall that if he ducked through the armory hall, he'd... Hoy! Moradin jumped slightly, even as he realized the voice belonged to a child. His grin was hidden by his thick, bushy beard as he peered around a corner to see young Arthas standing in front of a suit of armor on a small pedestal. The prince was all of 12 now, a right bonny young lad, all smiles and golden curls and rosy cheeks. At that moment, though, Prince Arthas looked very serious and had a wooden sword pointed at the throat of the suit of armor. "Think you to pass here, vile orc?" Arthas cried. "You are in Alliance lands. I will show you mercy this once. Be gone and never return." Although Moradin was hungry, and although he was late, he found himself watching, smiling. This was what they'd all fought for, was it not? He and Magni and their brother Bran, and the humans Lothar, rest his soul, and young Tiralion, they'd fought together against the orcs to save Ironforge toward the end of the Second War. And then Moradin and Bran had gone with the humans to the Dark Portal to watch its destruction with satisfaction, keeping the wee ones safe, buying a future for all of them. Arthas stiffened. "What? You will not depart? I have given you a chance, but now we fight." With a fierce cry, the young prince charged. He was wise enough not to actually attack the ancient suit of armor, which would no doubt incur his father's disapproval, but he set to his imaginary foe with vigor a few paces away. Moradin's grin faded. What was this? Who in the world had been teaching this boy? Look how wide and uncontrolled that pretend parry was. And his grip! Ah, wrong, all wrong. He frowned terribly, as after a particularly energetic swing, Arthas lost his grip on the wooden sword and it flew across the room to clatter loudly on the floor. Arthas gasped and looked around to see if the sound had drawn attention. His cheeks turned bright pink as he met Moradin's gaze. Ambassador, I was just... Moradin coughed, as embarrassed for the boy as Arthas was himself. "I'm looking for your father, boy. Can you direct me? This infernal place has too many turns." Arthas pointed to a stairway on his left. Moradin nodded and hurried up the twisting steps, anxious to be away from the scene. He arrived just in time to hear Thoris Trollbane bellowing, which, he mused, was hardly anything new. "Trade? With you? You're double-damned, no-good Horde sympathizers." "What's going on?" Moradin burst into the balcony, expecting to see... Well, he wasn't sure what, but it certainly wasn't a small green being with large bat-like ears and eyes that were currently wide with apprehension. He was completely bald and wore trousers, a crisp white waistcoat, and a monocle that had popped out and was now swinging wildly from a chain attached to his person. "No, no, no, no," the green creature gasped in a strange shrieking voice, waving his hands frantically. He stood about eye level with the breakfast table at which Trollbane and King Terenas were seated, and fumbled with the monocle. "You've got me all wrong. It's not like that at all." "Isn't it, Crix?" The mildness with which Terenas uttered the words told Moradin that nothing of real threat was going on. The king reached for a piece of bread and began to butter it. "No," Crix exclaimed, looking offended. "Well, one trade prince, yes, did that." He coughed slightly. "Allied with the Horde. But only one very foolish prince, and even he came to his senses after the Second War. But the rest of the goblins have come to realize that it's much better to remain neutral, Much better for you, for us, for everyone. Free trade thrives that way, and we all benefit. Moradin scowled. He knew what manner of creature he was facing now, a goblin. "What's this wee green money grubber doing at our breakfast table, Tyrannus?" Moradin asked, shouldering past the creature. Before the king could answer, the goblin burst out. "Crix Wicklish, pleasure to meet you. I see you're a dwarf." "Brilliant observation," Trollbane growled. "Perhaps your people would like to enter a trade agreement. These two humans don't seem so keen on it. I mean, think about it." Crix smiled ingratiatingly, the effect marred only by the sharpness of his teeth. "You like to mine? Why, we like to tear down trees. It's a perfect business relationship. Our shredders can clear land." "Thank you, Crix, that will be enough," Tyrannus interrupted. "Now that Ambassador Moradin has arrived, we have business to attend to. I'll talk again with you later this afternoon and look at the papers you promised me." "What?" Moradin scowled at Tyrannus. "This wee bugger does deals with both sides, Tyrannus. I sooner trust a... Hey." Crix froze, the apricot scone he had snagged halfway to his mouth. He smiled weakly. Moradin glared. Within a month of his arrival, the dwarf had been on a first-name basis with every one of the palace chefs, and he had gone to extra efforts to secure the friendship of the pastry chefs. Such overtures were now bearing sweet, delicious fruit, if the scones were any indication, and now this goblin was about to devour his pastries. "King Tyrannus asked you take your leave," he said. Crix nodded. The monocle fell out again. He popped a scone into his mouth, bowed low, and scurried off. "Ruddy parasite that one is," growled Moradin. "But amusing," Tyrannus said. "And his ideas do have merit. But now that you are here, Ambassador, I fear we must talk of less amusing things, such as the situation with King Perenolde." "King? Bah! The word sits ill in my mouth." "It's an outrage," Trollbane cried. He slammed a fist down on the table, making cups and flagons and plates jump. "He betrayed us all, damn near destroyed us, and this is all he gets?" His long face set in a deep scowl. "I say prison, if not outright execution." I'd not be keeping traitors in gilded cages myself," said Moradin. He did not mince words. He said what was on his mind outright and didn't worry about whom it might offend. Moradin knew that some of the Alliance rulers found that combination distressing, but he also knew that both Tyrannus and his old friend Trollbane found it refreshing. The three sat on a small table on one side of the palace's higher balconies that overlooked the lake just beyond the city, with the mountains forming a backdrop beyond. It was a stunning view, but it also served to ground their discussion, for it was through those same mountains that Orgrim Doomhammer had led his horde, thanks to the treachery of Alterax's ruler, Aiden Perenolde. After the war, Tyrannus had led Alliance troops into Alterac, declaring martial law and taking Perenolde. The fellow Trollbane had been ranting against into custody, but Tyrannus had simply placed the former king under house arrest, confining him to his palace, and the rest of his family to close watch. Nothing more had been done with them since then. Trollbane, for one, was not satisfied. As Perenolde's closest neighbor, he had long been forced to weather the Alterac king's wily schemes, and it had only been Trollbane's quick thinking and equally quick action that had sealed the mountain passes and cut off a portion of the Orcish horde. Otherwise, the entire force would have flowed into the plains and across the lake toward capital city itself, and most likely the city would have fallen. "I agree. He deserves a far worse fate," Tyrannus said carefully, clearly trying to soothe his friend's temper. Moradin reached for a scone and a hard-boiled egg. "But he is, or at least he was, a Sovereign king. a sovereign king, Turnus continued. We cannot simply exile him or imprison him, not without making every other king worry that we will do the same to them if they disagree with us on anything. We will if they turn traitor like he did, Trollbane argued, but he soon settled down. He was far from stupid, Moradin knew. That gruff exterior hid a sharp mind. Aye, it's a tricky issue, Moradin said, deciding to help himself to another pastry. You cannot be dropping him off a cliff, for it'll lose you the trust of your other fellows. But you cannot leave him to get away with it either. We need to force him to abdicate, Turnus pointed out yet again. This was not the first time they'd had this discussion. Once he's no longer king, we can try him and execute him as just another Alliance noble. He tugged at his beard. The problem is he's refusing. Trollbane snorted. Of course he is. He knows that means death. But we have to do something, and soon. Right now he's got too much freedom, and that's bound to cause trouble. Turnus nodded. It has certainly sat for too long, he agreed. Something must be done about Alterac, especially with these new problems brewing. He sighed. The last thing we need is to fight another war while worrying about betrayal again. And what of the lad? Moradin asked, flicking a stray crumb from his majestic bronze beard. Will he no be trying for the throne? Aladin, you mean? Trollbane replied. He snorted, cut from the same cloth as his father. I don't care for young Aladin myself much, Turnus admitted. He was far too pampered as a youth. He has never known hardship or travail and has never feared danger. I fear he has no leadership skills either. Yet what grounds have we to deny him the throne? He is Aiden's heir, Altrac's crown prince. If his father does abdicate, the crown falls to him. There's no proof he knew of his father's treachery, Trollbane said grudgingly. Not that being ignorant is much better than being underhanded, but at least he has that in his favor. Just then a servant appeared at the door. Moradin frowned, fearing that the pesky goblin wanted to talk to them. Instead, the servant had good news. Lord Deval Prestor wishes an audience, Your Majesty, he told Tyrannus. Ah, send him up, by all means, Lavin, Tyrannus said. He turned to Trollbane and Moradin. Have you both met Lord Prestor? Aye, and it's a fine man he is, Moradin replied. And much to his credit that he's survived as well as he has, with all he's faced. Trollbane nodded his agreement. Lord Prestor had been dealt a harsh hand by fate, Moradin reflected as he bit into the egg. He'd never heard of the man until recently, of course. He didn't much follow all the twists and turns of human nobility, but from what he'd been told, Prestor had been ruler of a tiny domain deep in the mountains of Lordaeron. He could trace his ancestry back to the royal house of Alterac, and was a distant cousin of Perenolde's. Prestor's entire realm had fallen to a dragon attack during the Second War, and he and a handful of close family alone had escaped. The first anyone had heard of the man or his realm had been a shocking introduction. Prestor had staggered all the way to Capital City without servants or guards, indeed with little more than the clothes on his back and his good name. His lineage had earned him admittance into noble circles, and his engaging personality had won him friends, the three at the table among them. It had been Prestor's suggestion to pass martial law in Alterac, and not only Tyrannus but the rest of the Alliance had agreed at once that it was a fine, albeit temporary, solution. The man in question stepped onto the balcony a moment later and executed a graceful and deep bow, his black curls gleaming almost blue in the warm, earthly light. Your Majesties, Prestor murmured, his rich baritone carrying easily across the small space. And noble ambassador, how good to see you all again. Indeed it is, said Tyrannus jovially. Sit and join us. Would you care for some tea? The apricot scones are particularly fine today, Moradin offered, covering his mouth with his hand as he inadvertently sprayed some crumbs. Something about Prestor's characteristic tidiness always made the dwarf feel a bit rustic. Many thanks, my lords. Prestor seated himself gracefully, though not before using his napkin to quickly dust off his seat, and poured a cup of tea. Moradin offered him the plate of scones, but Prestor smiled, holding up a manicured, uncalloused hand in polite refusal. I hope I'm not intruding? Not at all, not at all, Tyrannus assured him. In fact, your timing is excellent. We were just discussing the matter of Alterac. Ah, yes, of course. Prestor took an appreciative sip of tea. No doubt you have heard about young Iziden? He seemed surprised at the blank looks he received in response. One of Lord Perenolde's nephews, little more than a youth still. Ah, yes. Ran off to Gilneas, didn't he? Trollbane asked. Indeed he did, shortly before you declared martial law throughout Alterac. Rumors say he is hoping to rally support there for his own bid for the throne. Greymane mentioned something of that, Tyrannus recalled. But he has not met with the boy or encouraged his suit in any way. Prestor shook his head. He is noble indeed, King Greymane, he mused softly, to overlook something which could so easily work to his benefit. All he would need to do is back Iziden for the throne, and Gilneas would gain a direct stake in Altrac's welfare, and no doubt favored status through the kingdom's many mountain passes. Moradin scratched at his beard. Aye, that'd be a hard one to pass up, he agreed. Tyrannus and Trollbane exchanged glances. Greymane was canny enough not to miss such an opportunity. Yet he claimed he'd not spoken with the boy. Had he lied? Or was he playing a more subtle game? What do you think should be done with Alterac? Tyrannus asked Prestor. Why do you ask me, sire? An outsider's perspective is useful, and we value your opinion. Prestor colored slightly. Truly? You honor me, thank you. Well, I think you should claim it for your own, your majesty. You are the leader of the alliance, after all, and took the brunt of the costs for the last war. Surely you are due a reward for all your efforts. Tyrannus chuckled. No, thank you, he said, holding up a hand in mock horror. I have more than enough to handle here in Lordaeron. I have no desire to double my troubles by taking on a second kingdom. Moradin knew he had considered the idea, of course, and from these vantages it held merit. But the troubles it would cause, not least of them among his fellow rulers, would far outweigh the benefits, at least to Tyrannus' mind. How about you then, your majesty? Prestor suggested, turning to the strong guard king. Your quick action stopped Perenolde's treachery. I well know you lost many men defending those mountain passes from the orcs. A shadow of pain flickered across the young noble's face, and all three of his companions winced slightly, knowing exactly where his thoughts had led him. Maybe that's why he was so meticulous about his person. If he'd been forced to flee a city that had been destroyed by dragonfire, walking for ages in the same filthy clothes, Moradin mused, maybe he'd be a bit of a dandy now, too. Trollbane frowned thoughtfully, but before he could speak, Tyrannus interjected gently. Neither Thoris nor I could claim Alterac. It is not simply a matter of one kingdom invading another. We are all part of the Alliance, and must all work together to protect our world and our lands. The Alliance as a whole defeated the Horde and won the war. That means any spoils of war, including Alterac, must fall to the Alliance as well. He shook his head. If any one of us tried to annex Alterac, the Alliance rulers would feel slighted, and rightly so. Aye, Moradin agreed. It must be decided by all, or not all, he grinned. Though presenting a fine idea to the rest could ease the matter somewhat. Prestor nodded and set down his cup. My apologies if I spoke out of turn, he said, or if I offended you in any way. He offered them a small smile. I can see I still have much to learn before I can hope to match your wisdom in diplomacy. Turnus waved aside the apology. No harm done, dear boy. I asked for your opinion and you gave it. Part of the reason we three were meeting here was to discuss this very matter, in the hopes of finding some way to satisfy everyone involved and still keep Alterac safe and active. He smiled. Our friend Moradin is right. If we can present a good plan to the rest of the Alliance, it could save much time and argument. Of course, I only hope my small contribution has been in some way helpful. Prestor stood and bowed deeply. Now, if you will excuse me, I will leave you to these weighty deliberations, which I fear are far beyond my own ability. He waited for Tyrannus' nod of permission, then graced them all with a smile and exited the balcony. Trollbane watched the young lord go, frowning. Prestor may be naive, he said, but he has a point. Maybe Alterac should pay reparations. With what? Moradin scoffed. Their blood dry, just like all of us. Besides, that sounds too much like blood money, which is the same as saying vengeance. Most of our money is going toward rebuilding, Tyrannus pointed out. We added Alterac's treasuries to the Alliance once we took control of the kingdom. Aye, and the orc internment camps are no cheap either, Moradin added. With all the money going to those and to repairs, and to that fine new fortress by the portal, what's left for reparations? Trollbane sighed. You're right. I just feel they should pay somehow. Alterac's betrayal cost so many lives. Perenolde's betrayal, Tyrannus corrected gently but firmly. We must remember that. Very few of Alterac's citizens even knew of their king's treachery. Perenolde simply ordered them away from certain passes and made those trails accessible to the Horde. It was less a question of Alterac helping the Horde than of its king granting the orcs free passage and keeping his own citizens out of the way. True enough, Trollbane agreed. I've known many from Alterac over the years, and most are fine folk, not like their snake of a king. He shook his head, drained his flagon, and wiped his beard and mustache with the back of his hand. I'll give the matter more thought, he promised. As we all will, Moradin assured him, snatching up one last scone as they rose from their seats. Don't worry, we'll find a solution yet. I'm sure we will, Tyrannus agreed. I just hope we can do so before we're forced to set the matter aside for more pressing issues. His two companions knew what he meant. They had received Khadgar's warning only a few days before, and now were waiting on word from Tyrellian. If the Horde did attack again, if the portal did reopen, all questions about Alterac would quickly become moot. As long as Perenolde was under house arrest and the kingdom under Alliance control, they could worry about other details later, if they survived. Moradin thought somberly of young Arthas swinging away at a suit of armor, and hoped the prince would not get a taste of war just yet.
You can